Good evening, and welcome to Fine Point, where no narrative is sacred, no media hoax is safe, and we zero in on the big picture. I'm your host, Chanel Villon. Can you feel it in the wind? It's 1775, again. Trump and the American people have long wanted something Congress doesn't. Term limits to end career politicians. 6 years for representatives and 12 years for senators. Our founders envisioned Congress a part-time service job, not a lucrative career. Will term limits happen? Probably not. Term limits would take a convention of the states, a constitutional amendment. I'm not foolish enough to underestimate President Trump pulling off a political miracle, but the realist in me doesn't see a slam dunk path here. Lawmakers, though, have paid lip service to the idea. Few ever mean it. Here's turncoat Republican Senator Susan Collins 28 years ago in 1996.
If I'm elected, I will only serve 2 terms, regardless of whether a term limits law, a constitutional amendment passes or not.
And almost 30 years later, Collins is running for her 6th term in the Senate. The term limit chimera lives on, while being a politician in Washington has been a lifelong career for roughly 75% of Congress. Here's outgoing Senate Republican leader Mitch McConnell just this year.
Did you hear the question, Senator? Running for re-election in 2026? All right, I'm sorry, you all. We're going to need a minute. Senator Benny.
The Democrats are no better. They're nearly 90 and cracking hips in hallways. Look at Pelosi. You see, being a career politician pays. And it's not the $174,000 a year salary that makes millionaires. It's in years of insider trading and board memberships to spouses and children. They've even made apps to help you invest like a Pelosi or a Crenshaw. Pelosi's stock portfolio in 2023 went up 45%. Crenshaw's allegedly went up 41%. So on top of this, lawmakers also tried to push their salaries up a notch just a few weeks ago in their continuing resolution.
It's supposed to be about keeping government operations open and providing disaster relief aid to hurricane victims, which I'm sympathetic to. But if you read the bill carefully, it contains pay raises for members of Congress, and I'm not making this up, an expansion of their federal health benefits.
They wanted to raise their salaries to just under $250,000 a year. Both sides wanted raises, citing a slew of practical reasons.
And yet, trying to maintain 2 places to live, have clothes in 2 places, have a car in 2 places, it's very difficult.
When I got to Congress, I realized, holy smokes, that comes out of my pocket without reimbursement.
And you're not allowed to write off any of the expenses.
I've had a roommate every time I've rented an apartment. Upwards of 100 Congress members actually sleep in their office because it's expensive.
You know what? Good. I hope it's difficult. Because being in Congress is about service. Serving the voters is not about your comfort. I hope it's uncomfortable. That would make sure that it was a part-time job. And if we eliminate insider trading, then we'd start to see who really wants to serve. You see, our founders hated the idea of career politicians. That's why they gave Congress only the bare minimum. Between 1789 and 1855, Congress was paid a per diem, not a salary. $6 per day. That's $215 in today's money, but add in also travel expenses. But that's all. That's what a member of Congress made. In 1816, Congress voted to give lawmakers a salary to move away from that per diem model, and supporters argued a flat salary would prevent lawmakers from dragging sessions out to collect their per diem. But voters were livid. They had gone from compensating Congress in today's dollars about $20,000 a year per lawmaker in per diem to a salary of about $32,000 a year. The public outrage was loud and clear. Americans did not want career politicians, and they saw salaries as the key to that. And you know what? if you drag out your sessions, we'll vote you out the next round. That's how they reasoned. So Congress cowered. Congress reinstated the $215 a day per diem system, and the people voted out much of Congress the following election, just to make sure Washington got their point. Nearly 40 years later, Congress tried again and succeeded in establishing a yearly salary for its members. By 1855, Congress would receive a salary of $3,000 a year. In today's money, that's about $110,000, the salary of a good government clerk. Today, most members of Congress earn $174,000, 3 times the salary of the average U.S. taxpayer. The Speaker of the House earns roughly $223,000, but the money is not in the salary. The money is in staying in Congress, in playing the insider trading game. Leading Democrat light Nancy Pelosi, in office for nearly 4 decades, started off with a net worth estimated at $160,000. Her reported net worth with her husband Paul today ranges to well above $200 million. What they're doing here is abuse. But they'll say, all on a congressional salary, right? Good, honest investment decisions, yes? So, assuming we won't get a term limits amendment, I propose the following to help make a stint in Congress a time of service and not a payout. 1, eliminate congressional salaries altogether. Return to the per diem model. Let's find out who wants to serve this country and who wants to serve their bank accounts. Go back to the founders' model of taxpayer-funded travel. And you know what? If you're a member of Congress, you get treated with decorum. Have airlines reserve first-class seats for sitting members of Congress on predetermined travel schedules. We've subsidized these airlines enough. They better give us the government rate. 2, Congress complains living expenses are too high in Washington, D.C., and having to maintain 2 lives across the country is unsustainable. Well, I sympathize. Fine. Empty out the Department of Education building, the entire building, and maybe some others. Turn it into basic congressional dormitories and provide shuttles so they don't have to worry about gassing up that expensive black Escalade. If you don't like this, go fund your own lifestyle. 3, cut the hush money slush fund and publish all names of lawmakers who have used it. It would be one thing if they were using their own money to cover up their own sexual deviances. It would still be a scandal, but hell, we're paying to cover up their shame. No, make it very uncomfortable for these lawmakers to harass or scandalize their staff. And if they do, they deserve shame and embarrassment, not taxpayer-funded protections. And 4, this is a big one. Term limit the staffers. Staff term limits may be a bigger deal than term limiting Congress and doesn't require an amendment. As our founders warned in Federalist Paper 39, it is essential for the elected to be drawn from the people and not the political elites. And time in office should be for a limited period. Otherwise, tyrannical nobles would take over. Ladies and gentlemen, time to dethrone the tyrannical nobles. Joining us now for reaction is someone who is very familiar with all of this, but on a completely different system. Peter McIlvena, host of the Hearts of Oak podcast, chief of staff in the British House of Lords. You know a thing or two about governmental reform and how all these things work. Welcome back.
Great to be with you. Thanks, Chanel.
Term limits. Tell us about how England does this, the United Kingdom does this. You don't necessarily have term limits. There are pros and cons to this argument, but what is your take on career politicians in the United States versus what you may see as career politicians in the UK?
Well, I hope you'll have me back after answering that question, Chanel. I was nodding along to your monologue at the beginning, agreeing with many of those points. And in the UK, a member of the British Parliament, 650 in the Parliament, like the House of Representatives, they earn probably $110,000. And then in the House of Lords, which is your Senate, second chamber, they earn nothing. They earn an amount when they turn up each day of around maybe $350. So even if a member of the House of Lords sat every day that Parliament was sitting, maybe 190 days, they would only earn maybe $60,000. So compare $60,000 for a year for a member of the House of Lords with a member of the Senate. And that is a wide gap.
So you're saying that the House of Lords adopts the per diem model?
It does, and that's how it is always done. And I know that those from the House of Lords, when they step into the House of Lords, have traditionally served in all different industries. And when they come into the House of Lords, it's in recognition of that service, whether it's I've worked for Lord Pearson for 10 years. He worked in the insurance industry and tried to change insurance practices. Baroness Cox, who I know well in the House of Lords, she worked in healthcare and education. And it's people like that who have served the country in different professions, when they go into the House of Lords, it is a huge step down often. Often they're earning large sums of money, and actually when they go into the House of Lords, often they walk away from that. So it is about service to country and not about lining your own pockets. But one thing you said at the beginning, Chanel, is so true. It's not about the salaries, it's about the insider trading. And that is a US specific issue. That is something that we generally don't see in the UK at all. Generally, the money that's made.
Why is that? I love having your take on it, because from our vantage, it's ironic. You come from, the United Kingdom is a land of classes, and yet the system, the parliamentary system, is way more open and full of discourse, and does not seem to have the problems that we have here in the United States with career politicians. So on the insider trading point, that is one of the heaviest, most straightforward way to make money in Congress. Why isn't there as much insider trading in the United Kingdom in the parliamentary system as there is here in the United States?
Well, it's never been an issue. It is never. And usually the understanding is that you can make your money after serving as a member of Parliament for 15, 20 years. Then you can go to the speaking circuit, the after dinner circuit. You can maybe publish your memoirs. You make money that way. But while you're in the House of Lords, you have to declare a second income. Often that will be maybe a newspaper columnist. Nigel Farage, he has been on GB News, and he writes for the Telegraph every so often. But they might get maybe 60,000, 80,000 per year. So that's what insider trading looks like in the UK. Being a commentator in the media, maybe making 60, 80, 100,000 pounds, dollars. And you compare that to some of the figures I've seen have blown me away, of millions and millions a year, of huge investment portfolios. And obviously, many of those people in Congress are getting tips on the inside, and that's why they're buying. In the UK, that would be frowned upon. Often we frown upon success in the UK. That's a huge failure in the UK. And success should be appreciated. It should be celebrated, because you want politicians, along with the general public, to be successful. But when some are more successful than others, when some are, it's better for them to succeed, but actually others don't succeed, it does seem to be a two-tier system. And you mentioned the British system being a class system. I never realized that until I started working in the House of Lords. And I realized it is a class system, but there is nowhere the desire or the expectation to make the large sums of money while you serve in Parliament as there is in the US. And I think there should be a ban on actually earning money elsewhere, but then maybe raise the pay. So you have an amount, so there's no desire, no incentive, no interest to look elsewhere. And the member of Parliament, the representative on Capitol Hill, can spend their time caring for their constituents and those who voted them in, and not thinking how they can make extra money to top up their salary.
No, it's fascinating. And I think it's ironic that, yes, there is this view that the British system is more elitist and it's all of these things, but in reality, in practice, you don't seem, the House of Lords, the Parliament does not seem to have the same kinds of issues that we face here in the United States. But here in the United States, it seems that the lawmakers simply have more access to information and they're allowed to do more things with that information. I don't know, though, gleaning from what you've said, whether this is a cultural problem or this is just the way the system works. It seems to me one of the biggest differences is the fact that those salaries are not paying off too well, and playing the market also does not pay off, and therefore you don't have those abuses.
People get into professions generally because that's the career they want, and they get into politics because they want to have influence, because they have issues that they care about. Now, we've moved away from conviction to consensus politics, as you probably have in the US. So that ideal system is fast disappearing, but still we have a way where it is not there to make your money in a way the US. And surprised at the consultancy that is available in the US. I'm surprised at, well, the whole area, the whole political sphere, when you look at elections, obviously you could tell me better the amount spent on advertising in America, the amount spent on consultants. That's a whole industry. We don't have that same industry in the UK. It's a much lower level. And when people talked about Nigel Farage maybe getting, well, 100 million, might be 10 million, who knows, from Elon Musk, that would blow politics out of the water in the UK, where in the US, 10 million or so on an election wouldn't buy you airtime on those shows. It's so different.
No, it is. And it's a very interesting conversation when paired with the spirit of capitalism. But when it comes to people like Nancy Pelosi over on our side, when she was asked famously, would she consider putting restrictions on insider trading, her immediate answer was, nope, I wouldn't do that. We have the right as individuals to invest in the market and to participate in the market. I think most Americans would absolutely support her statement there. What we don't support is the double standard of they have access to insider information, but Martha Stewart goes to prison because she had access to, quote, insider information, which at this point has become very questionable. So the double standard is what is rampant here in the U.S., and it's very interesting to hear from the other side. And I don't think we've had this conversation really in the populace about how to fundamentally change this beyond just term limits. But as always, Peter, we're out of time, but what a pleasure it is to visit with you. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Chanel. Anytime.
Will the
Think had you stayed in the race, would you have won?
Yes.
Yeah.
I was confident I would beat Trump.
I didn't like the way they did.
As President Biden prepares to leave the White House, he may be senile, but the grudge part of his brain hasn't quite disintegrated yet. According to insiders, and as you've seen, those close to Biden not only regrets dropping out of the race, he still believes he would have defeated President-elect Donald Trump. Of course, pure delusion, but he probably would have done better than his cackling successor, Kamala Harris. President Biden also reportedly regrets choosing Merrick Garland as Attorney General, blaming Garland for not prosecuting President Trump and not using enough lawfare to go after Trump and his allies regarding January 6th. But maybe there's one trick still up the sleeve of the corrupt DOJ. According to contributing writers, attorneys at the publication The Hill, the Democrats can still deploy lawfare against President Trump to prevent him from taking office. In this piece, it argues President Trump is an oath-breaking insurrectionist, and he is therefore ineligible to be president. Seems like this is an old argument, but it comes back. These leftist attorneys are perverting Section 3 of the 14th Amendment of the Constitution, which states, remember, no person shall hold any office, civil or military, under the United States or under any state who, having previously taken oath to support the Constitution of the United States, shall have engaged in insurrection or rebellion against the same, or given aid or comfort to the enemies thereof. Now, we know this is far-fetched and insane that they're pulling this argument out again, but the Democrats have been awfully quiet. Are they, in fact, plotting to take the advice of these two unhinged leftist attorneys in the liberal media? Attorney Mike Yoder joins us now. He's the founder and president of Citizen AG. Welcome back, Mike.
Thanks for having me on.
Your take on this article and the suggestion?
Absolutely atrocious. Both looking at it from the political landscape lens and then also looking at it through the lens of just the legal system in this country. From the legal side of it, I'll start there. The biggest issue of this is going back to the history and context of why we even have this disqualification clause in our Constitution. Or in the Bill of Rights, rather. It's based on essentially the Reconstruction era. It was to prevent Confederates from taking office who actually took up and fought in the Civil War against the United States. And one of the biggest differentials here is that there was no overt action that Trump had engaged in. In fact, the only two things that are notable are the two tweets in which he expressly said to go peacefully, and he did not go to the Capitol himself. He was not involved in any so-called riot. And more importantly, the terms rebellion and insurrection are not even defined. The clause has actually only been used twice. It was used the first time in 1919, and the last time it was used was in 2022, prior to the release of all the information as to what we know about the truth behind January 6th. And that was against a county commissioner in New Mexico. So the legal landscape of this is very flimsy. They don't know the terms or how to define it. And most important of all, there's no answer as to who would actually adjudicate this. Would it be the courts? Would it be Congress? Would it be individual states themselves? These are all major questions, and there's not a lot of legroom left considering they have about a week before January 6th.
Well, despite what you just laid out, activist judges, Democrats, lawmakers are still hoping they can carry this out. Here is Maryland Congressman Jamie Raskin just in October. Listen.
It's going to be up to us on January 6, 2025, to tell the rampaging Trump mobs that he's disqualified.
What does he mean it's up to us?
I guess it depends on who's in the room with him at the time he's speaking, because his statements are about as inconsistent as Biden's, and Biden is in cognitive decline. So when Raskin's referring to that, I presume he's speaking as to Congress, and somehow he interprets the disqualification clause to confer power on Congress itself, despite a nationwide mandate speaking loud and clear as to who the nation wants as the 47th president, not only both in the White House, but also in the Senate and House as well. So I'm not really sure where he just assumes that Congress has that authority. He's likely playing on the fact that the average person doesn't know what the disqualification clause is and doesn't understand that it doesn't actually explicitly state who would adjudicate or resolve those issues. But I would beg to differ and respectfully disagree that it is not within Congress's authority. The courts couldn't answer it because they're prohibited from answering political questions under the political questions doctrine. And if the states were the ones to adjudicate this, it would result in a lot of inconsistent rulings. So I don't particularly see a way that this is going to come to fruition. And I think it's just their last ploy to stay relevant in the last 3 weeks of the Biden administration.
Well, speaking of the outgoing Biden administration, Hunter Biden has been he has been pardoned for crimes he may or may not have committed, despite years of the Biden family saying he had done nothing wrong. One last question before I let you go. A federal judge on Friday blocked the Biden administration from continuing to sell off materials for the border wall. Trump is calling this a major, crucial win for America. What does this mean in the interim, in this period now where Joe Biden is president, and January 20 when President Trump takes office?
Well, for one, I just want to applaud Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton for doing the Lord's work and on behalf of America in bringing this action. But back in May, he was able to secure an injunction that prohibited the administration from using funds allocated under Congress for anything but building the border wall. And now what they're saying is, we're able to circumvent that by selling the border wall. Well, the problem therein lies in the fact that money used to purchase the wall that is now being sold was effectively money that was not used to build the wall if it went towards purchasing parts that you are now selling to private third parties for pennies on the dollar at, I think it started at $5 when it was in bidding. And there's another layer to this story that a lot don't know yet. Based on what I've been able to see, based on what I've looked into, there is no contract between the Defense Logistics Agency, which is the sub-agency within the DoD that actually owns the government material, the border wall. And when the GovPlanet website is auctioning off this government property, those who buy it, if there is no contract, which I have, again, not been able to find one online on the SAM database or anything else, then that individual that would be receiving the wall and purchasing it would technically be in receipt of stolen government property. And I would not put it past the administration if they dropped indictments a week before the administration change. And now Trump has the issue of that sitting in his lap as to whether he drops the charges, which would effectively look like using his power and level the playing field from the political scorecard in terms of what Biden did for his son Hunter. But also it would lock that up. It could potentially get it put in the chain of custody with evidence and prevent the wall from being able to be used for rebuilding until those cases are either adjudicated or dropped. So it could create a massive mess, and I don't want anyone to fall into that pitfall. But the contract, the last one I saw, was entered into in 2021 for only 2 years between the Ritchie brothers, which is the company that owns the GovPlanet website that is auctioning off those parts. So that's something of interest as well. But again, Ken Paxton was able to get it done by just simply enforcing the injunction that he was able to obtain back in May this year.
He's doing phenomenal work down there. We're so glad that he survived all the political assaults of the year before, in the past year, really. Well, yeah. Mike Yoder, always a pleasure. Thank you so much for the time. We're all out of it, but we appreciate your insight.
Thank you for having me on.
President Carter dies at age 100. What legacy does he leave behind? Political operative Roger Stone joins us next. We'll be right back.
Once again, to the inner and spiritual strength of our nation. As my high school teacher, Miss Judy Coleman, used to say, we must adjust to changing times and still hold to unchanging principles.
Well, President Jimmy Carter, the 39th president of the United States and the oldest living president, died peacefully surrounded by family yesterday evening on December 29th. He was 100 years old. Now, President Carter was a one-term presidency. His presidency was unremarkable and eventually would end New Deal liberalism, give rise to the Reagan Revolution, and leave a tangled mess of bureaucracy at home and abroad. So his presidency was insignificant, but there were some consequences. President Carter did things, though, that Democrats today are incapable of doing, and they would do well to learn from him. He acknowledged he was wrong. He chose not to seek power again and worked to build a different kind of legacy, one rooted in selflessness and not in enriching himself or the Democratic Party. He poured himself into humanitarian efforts, such as Habitat for Humanity and assisting in recovery efforts for world disasters. He taught Sunday school in his 90s. President Carter worked to be a better human and a better American. This level of humility and humanity is something lacking entirely from the modern Democratic Party. Today's Democratic Party is not one of the humble peanut farmers or humanitarians or men of service. It's not a party of World War II vets, nor a party that values and encourages 77 years of marriage. It is instead the party of the globalist elites who collect dividends from endless war and blood spilled. It is a party who relentlessly seeks power and works to make the world a more complicated and less diplomatic place, a world of chaos and malaise. Carter was not a perfect man, and by no stretch of the imagination a perfect president, but he wasn't made up and propped up by the corruption and the bureaucracy and the war machine that occupies the White House and the deepest corners of our government today. Joining us to reckon with his legacy as legendary political operative Roger Stone. You can see his work, by the way, on stonezone.com. And I'm told you can get his hat there, too. Roger, welcome.
Great to be with you. You know, I met Jimmy Carter when I was working for Governor Ronald Reagan, and I accompanied candidate Reagan to his first debate. And Carter was very kind, We had a nice conversation. It was entirely civil. You see, I think he was a good man, a decent man, a good Christian, a devout Christian, a patriotic American. I think he was in deep over his head. You know, he really was also an outsider, and his presidency was also swallowed up by the globalists, by Brzezinski and Eisenstadt and others. He made some egregious mistakes. One we're suffering for today, his decision to give away the Panama Canal, a process that began under his predecessor, Gerald Ford, but was actually done by Jimmy Carter. Now, with the Chinese Communist Party essentially controlling the Panamanian government, they both refused to close down the Darien Gap, through which hundreds of thousands of military-age men are passing on their way to illegally entering the United States. But they also potentially could at any time close the canal to our commerce. This is a major mistake made by Jimmy Carter. His poor handling of Iran and the Iranian hostage crisis, yet another example of an egregious mistake. But despite his mistakes, see, I don't think, unlike Barack Obama, for example, that he was evil. I do think he was a patriotic American. And you're right, in his post-presidential years, he didn't seek to cash in with multi-million-dollar film deals with Netflix. He devoted himself to his fellow man and to charitable activities. The way he conducted himself as a former president, I think, is an absolute model for future presidents.
Well, you said it so well. You tweeted this and you said it just now. You cite globalists like Brzezinski and Eisenstadt as having played a role in, I guess, either manipulating him or swallowing him up by pushing their globalist policies. Brzezinski, I mean, that's the father of Mika from Morning Joe. How did Brzezinski particularly go in and, mislead or swallow up Carter's presidency?
Well, I mean, the entire Carter presidency really was exemplified by weakness abroad and at home. You remember, he had a famous televised address to the nation in which he blamed the people. He said, our problem with America is the people have a malaise. No, the American people didn't have a malaise. Our leaders had a malaise. He let our military, for example, atrophy to very weak levels. He was way in over his head. He was a terrible president. We're still suffering for a number of the decisions that he made. On the other hand, there are a few bright points. The Camp David Accords between Anwar Sadat and Menachem Begin is an important achievement, right up there with the Abraham Accords achieved under President Donald Trump. But overall, I guess the message here is one that he was a decent human being, that he was a good man. I think he was led astray. Remember, Ted Kennedy was supposed to be their nominee. Jimmy Carter came out of nowhere to snatch the Democrat nomination. At Richard Nixon's 1972 inauguration, I went to a reception for the governors. I was working on it, actually, and I met Chip Carter, who was Jimmy Carter's son. And we were just making small talk, and I said, so who do you think will be the Democrat nominee for president in 1976? And he said to me with great confidence, Jimmy Carter. And of course, I thought he was out of his mind, but he turned out to be absolutely right. So like Trump, in a way, he was an outsider, but he got swallowed up by the swamp and by others who I think dominated his presidency, and that led to his disastrous record. Incumbent presidents don't usually get defeated. Reagan's defeat of him in 1980, I think, is a total shift of the country, and it is akin to the recent election that we had, which I think is going to turn out to be one of the most significant realignments in American history.
You can feel it in just about every corner of the world. The shift is happening not just here, it's happening worldwide, and the world is acknowledging that. That's refreshing. But I'm concerned, though, about a few things in the future, especially with how quiet the left has been going into all of this. I have no doubt they have something up their sleeves, but time will tell what they actually have. Now, in the meantime, you recently also stated something that I found fascinating. You said you read a House report that proved that Congressman Adam Schiff and Eric Swalwell both leaked classified documents to inflame the Russian collusion hoax. Now, anyone who's followed this story, this is not a shocker. That, unfortunately, even for President Carter, was a story that he fell for. Listen to this interview between Carter and a reporter.
The president himself should condemn it, admit that it happened, which I think 16 of the intelligence agencies have already agreed to say. And there's no doubt that the Russians did interfere in the election. And I think the interference, although not yet quantified, if fully investigated, would show that Trump didn't actually win the election in 2016.
There he is, just following along with that narrative. What do you think?
Poor Jimmy Carter. Actually, I understated the facts in that tweet. It was actually the Inspector General's report from the Biden administration's Justice Department Inspector General that proved that Congressman Adam Schiff and Congressman Eric Swalwell both illegally leaked classified documents to the media to further their false Russian collusion hoax. And when you corner Adam Schiff after spending tens of millions of dollars on the Russian collusion hoax, he says, oh no, a high-level Trump campaign official was sharing polling information with a Russian intelligence asset, and we proved it. Every word of that is a lie. The high-level Trump campaign official he refers to is Paul Manafort. The time frame that he refers to, there was no proprietary Trump polling information to pass, and the man that he claims that Manafort passed it to, Konstantin Kilimnik, is not a Russian intelligence asset. He's an American intelligence asset.
Right.
As the independent journalist Matt Taibbi has overwhelmingly proved. So the Russian collusion hoax, which is created by Barack Obama, Joe Biden, who is in the room, Susan Rice, John Brennan, James Comey, these people need to be held to account.
Well, Roger, it's always a pleasure to visit with you. Always a pleasure to visit some of the historical aspects of these headlines too, and we appreciate the time as always. January 20 can't come soon enough. I know you feel that way too.
I really do. In the meantime, Chanel, Happy New Year. God bless you.
Happy New Year and God bless. Did AI change the way we hold elections this year? The answer is yes, but in a very surprising way. Stephen Rowe of the Leadership Institute weighs in. Coming up. We have seen some stunning developments in AI this year, which led to many theorizing that the fast-evolving tech would disrupt this year's elections. The experts tried to make the public panic that we would be awash in misinformation, unable to distinguish fact from fiction. With the election over and the year coming to a close, the data and results are in. And it turns out AI did not impact the presidential election or elections worldwide at all. Wired Magazine studied the use of AI in worldwide elections this year, highlighting the use of deepfakes and AI-generated videos, showcasing fandom over certain candidates. It turned out people were not misled by these creations at all, and were not swayed by AI, but existing partisan divides deepened. So is AI's true impact on politics not disinformation, as the left would have you believe, but instead sharpened polarization? Joining us now, Stephen Rowe, Director of Digital Training of Leadership Institute. Stephen, what say you?
Yes, thank you so much for having me. And absolutely, AI is turning up the heat on political polarization, but like you pointed out, not in the ways that people would expect. Zooming back to the beginning of this year, you saw the experts, so-called, declare these doom and gloom forecasts, like you pointed out. But we found that many Americans see right through deep fake technology, whether or not that hand has 6 fingers or just 5, or that metallic sound on a person's voice. We're able to find that most of the time people see right through this type of stuff. But what you found is actually a much more subtle, a much more nuanced approach to what is happening. And what we found often is that the candidate using artificial intelligence wasn't using it to deep fake or deceive, but maybe just help them write an email that could help them fundraise for their campaign, help them craft a speech to reach a particular segment or group of an audience. And that's ultimately the more subtle way that AI has played a role in these election cycles. But we have found that most Americans are pretty smart and see through any deep fake technology. And that's a good thing. Looking forward to next year and these other elections that are going to happen. I think you'll see more of the same. I think we're pretty good at the transparency markers on artificial intelligence. And I think we're even better at seeing through when somebody is saying something that doesn't sound quite right. So I have tremendous faith in the American people, and I think we're going to be able to coexist with AI throughout the elections to come.
Another added benefit for some of the confusion that has emerged out of this AI technology, it looks so real, and there are scenes that are just mind-blowing. But what it has done too is it has heightened people's awareness. I think you alluded to this earlier, but it heightens people's awareness, and they are way more skeptical of everything they actually see. And they question now, is that real? Which was not a question we had to ask in past. I mean, look, what's on the screen now, all of that is AI generated purely. It would be very hard to tell that it was AI, but at the same time, people now are seeing examples like this and being way more critical of the content that is coming before them.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And it's going to be the next step in what I like to think of cybersecurity, or even just like locking your keys, traditional security, right? If you leave your car on a public street, you remember to kind of lock the door so that it is a little bit more secure. And also in the real world, what you'll see often is when something feels just a little off, it encourages you to do just a little bit more research. And this is really the next step of that. And so we should be vigilant. We should stay aware to the best of our ability. But if we're doing the research and we are using trusted channels of information, I think we'll be able to coexist in this new world that we live in.
It's exciting and scary all at once. Speaking of trying to regulate some of it or trying to get a hold of it, the New York State government, in another story, will have to provide public reports detailing how they're utilizing AI. This requirement also has them publish reviews of AI software and bans government from using AI in place of human judgment in terms of deciding childcare or unemployment insurance. Now, insurance companies have been caught using AI to drop customers. Is this a responsible way to govern AI, or is it government overreach?
Yeah, that is a fantastic question, and the questions that we should be asking. This whole story reminds me of Ronald Reagan's famous words that the 9 most terrifying words are that I'm from the government and I'm here to help. And I think that's what you're seeing when it comes to this law, particularly in New York. This is potentially a really good attempt at control and also putting a lot of red tape around innovation. To be clear, we definitely need transparency. Yes. We need to know what's happening, what's going on. But asking the government to regulate itself is kind of like going on a football field and asking the quarterback to also play referee or something to that effect. And they're going to raise the flag when it helps them. And if something bad happened, maybe they shove it under the rug just a little bit. And I think that's what you're going to see here with this rule in New York. I think we do need regulation. But this particular law that the governor of New York has signed is one where I think you're going to find that people are favoring bureaucrats over innovation and technology. And I would call it a government overreach for sure.
Yeah, because there's a way to have both tools, right? You can use AI because it will streamline workload immensely, but also have a human judge look at the material towards the end just to double check. there was a way to do this, but it seems like they went just the very heavy-handed route, which I guess is no surprise in New York. Another story I wanted to ask you about is this huge debate. A lot of us were enjoying Christmas and having a wonderful time with our families, only to tune into Twitter a couple days later to find a very, very concerning divide has been created inside the conservative world, pitting Elon Musk and the MAGA base against each other when it comes to the issue of hiring in our tech companies and the H-1B visa programs. This weekend, President Trump has said he is in favor of H-1B visas. He was clear. He put out a clean statement. He's used them personally though he's critiqued it in the past. He's critiqued the abuses of it. He really didn't offer more than that. I mean, Musk is taking this as a victory from this discussion, but it's far from over. Talk about the way this debate evolved. I will just tell you myself, I was stunned to see how MAGA world split into two different categories in very unexpected ways, and the debates were very rigorous.
Yes, very heated. And I was probably like you and many people watching the show at home, I was gnawing into a turkey leg or just prepping for that Christmas dinner, and you tune into social media and you see this, extreme debate on the social media platform of X. But there's a couple things that are really positive here. Number one is that we're able to have a public debate and discourse on a social media platform. I remember zooming back to 2016 and before, where the platform formerly known as Twitter would have stopped this left, right, and center. So the fact that it's able to even happen, I think, is a net positive on the whole. But you're right, it absolutely is splitting kind of that pro tech side and pitting them against the pro MAGA side. I do think that there is a compromise that is able to be reached between the two groups, but I would also encourage people at home to remember that other quote from Ronald Reagan, that the person who is 80% your friend most of the time is not your 20% enemy. And on the platform of X, we're able to actually dialogue and have this discourse in a way that has never been able to happen before, at least in present memory. I remember if you go back to like the Lincoln Douglas debates, right, that you had to be a presidential candidate to have a voice on the main stage and in the mainstream, or even zooming out to the 90s and the early 2000s, where you had CNN's Crossfire, where a few politicians potentially debated a particular subject. But now the average person, someone at home right now can literally respond to Elon Musk and say, I think you're wrong, or I think you're right, and here's why. And us eating that turkey leg at home, we're able to discern what's right and wrong for this country. But let's be clear, immigration is the number one issue, potentially, of our time. And so it is important to have these dialogues and these debates. Ultimately, I think what you're going to find is people are going to be pretty happy with what President Trump decides. I think there is a middle ground here, and we all agree where we can kind of start our efforts, certainly with the southern border. And as we start to look at other immigration programs like this H-1B, ultimately, you're going to find that compromise that works.
No, that's beautifully said. And I would hope that the entire Twitter sphere, X sphere, hears that portion, because this is more good news than bad. I'm glad that the debate happened, but in terms of the actual content of the debate, the concern is the southern border, not as much H-1B visas. But again, broadly speaking,
seriously,
it's
if you just look
a
at the
sign
numbers,
of a healthy discourse.
Completely. Looking at the numbers, I think it's roughly, based on the lowest estimates, 11 million people crossing the southern border, probably more than that. And you look at the H-1B visa program, I think it's like 850,000. Don't quote me on that. It's less than 500,000. Yeah. So let's focus on that PEMDAS. Let's put the priorities first, and then certainly I think once you start seeing these smaller parts of immigration be decided, we'll find that compromise that works for both sides. But I think everyone inherently is pro-America. It's just the lens you want to see it through. Do we need to pull the best and the brightest from the world to come here to our country? Absolutely. But also, do we need Americans to keep their jobs and to be able to apply and be the front runner, whether it's tech or construction or anything of the sort? Absolutely. And so I think both parties have America's interests at heart here. Ultimately, I think we will find the compromise.
Well said. I hope it's true. Stephen Rowe, always a pleasure to have you on. Thank you so much.